Hamilton is proposing this U.S. bank. What do you think? It's long. Jefferson took it totally apart. The whole idea, and in my mind, proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was unconstitutional. The government was not supposed to be in the banking business.
Is there a special name for that retort?
I'll send it to you in the notes. I've got it, it's farther down here. But it was, as a matter of fact, there's a book written about it. Jefferson's comment and Hamilton's response. Hamilton took 10,000 words to respond. Which basically said, when he finished, is the necessary and proper clause means whatever I want it to mean. That was his bottom line. It's necessary because I said so. Now you can read the 10,000 words. If you find something different when he gets down to the bottom, please let me know. My friend that I was telling you about, and she really wants to meet you, David. She would like to confer with you as much as possible. And she said, don't be discouraged by the fact that her last name is Cox.
Well, you know of my family troubles?
I know nothing. I know nothing. But if you want a definition of a patriot, Wendy Cox is a patriot. She has fallen on my plan, which I will relate to you later, how I think we can fix this thing. She has fallen on my plan and she's doing it diligently. If somebody announces they're running for office in La Plata County, they get a visit from Wendy. And day before yesterday, she called me and she was very distressed because she was talking to a candidate for sheriff. And this candidate for sheriff told her the federal government can do anything they want to because of the supremacy clause of the Constitution. And he said, if the feds come in here and tell me to do this, that, or the other, I will do it because I have no choice. And she called me and she was apoplectic. She said, how do I respond to this nut? And I said, sometimes, Wendy, there's times you just cut your losses. This man has been involved in government for too long to be able to think for himself. There's something that takes over your brain, especially if you get inside the Beltway. So don't get a house there. Live outside. There's something in the water, there's something in something, it takes over people's minds. That power. And our founder spoke about that. What would happen down the road when we don't have ethical, honest people? What will happen when they're elected to office? That was the great argument between John Locke and Hobbes. Because Hobbes said we have to have government because we have evil people. And Locke said, what happens when the evil people control the government? And the reason I get so angry, I get tons of emails every day. I've got over 400 people on my email list. I get tons of mail every day from good-meaning people who send me, and I tell anybody, if you send me a piece of email that says Obama in the first 10 sentences, it will be deleted. Obama is not the problem with this country. The people who have voted for this Constitution are the problem in this country. They cannot get there without our help. Except now for electronic voting machines, I'll take that back. But it is a huge problem. But these people believe, and this gentleman asked her, well, if the Supreme Court says something, we have to do it. It's not in Article 3, Section 3, people. There's nothing in Article 3 of the Constitution that says the Supreme Court has the right to determine what is constitutional and what is not. It's not there.
Within the states.
Within the states. But most of the federal laws are unconstitutional they're dealing with anyway. So what did Thomas Jefferson have to say about judges? I would say most likely Thomas Jefferson hated judges almost as much as I do. And here's some quotes for you. And he sent to Mr. Jarvis a letter in 1820. Now you got to remember Jefferson was president 1800 to 1808. The old redhead's getting white in his whiskers by this time, and he says, "You seem to consider the judges the ultimate arbiters of all constitutional questions. A very dangerous doctrine indeed, and one which would place us under the despotism of an oligarchy." Another quote from TJ. "When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and as oppressive as the government from which we recently separated." Letter to Charles Hammond, July 1821. Another comment, the judiciary of the United States, I love this one. Ooh. "The judiciary of the United States is a subtle corps of sappers and miners constantly working underground to undermine our Constitution from a coordinate of a general and special government to a general supreme one alone. This will lay all things at their feet. I will say that against this every man should raise his voice, and more should uplift his arms." And I don't think he was talking about these appendages. "The opinion which gives to the judges the right to decide what laws are constitutional and what not only for themselves in their own sphere of action, but for the legislature and executive also in their spheres, would make the judiciary a despotic branch of government." Wisdom of Jefferson just constantly amazes me. And when you can sit there at the University of Virginia and look at a man who made copious notes on everything, you can actually go through and look. He would ride across Monticello and he would make notes when he wrote out what was blooming, what was not blooming, what plant was doing this, what plant was doing that, what section produced this last year, what section produced this. He was just absolutely a man who kept impeccable records. But can anybody ever tell me if there any recorded version of Jefferson giving a speech?
His first, when he was when he was going to school in Virginia at the
William and Mary?
What's that?
William and Mary?
Yeah, and he was at a dance, I believe. I read a book about.
That's where he met Patrick Henry.
Yeah, and
They played fiddle together.
he was very, very upset because his presentation went so poorly. He discovered that he was a very, very bad speaker.
And there's a reason for that. Thomas Jefferson had a speech impediment, which he was very cognizant of after that first presentation. I always thought that would have been a great place to be, to see those learned people in that same room. And especially to see Jefferson and Patrick Henry playing violins together. Where I come, they're called fiddles. But they were playing violins together. That, to me, is one of the epics of history, to have been able to witness that. Although Jefferson and Patrick Henry didn't speak much in later life. There was a reason for that. Patrick Henry was the first governor of the state of Virginia. When the Revolutionary War was going on, Patrick Henry himself, as governor, would sit on wagons to deliver goods to our Continental Army. He drove the wagons himself, along with other people. But he said, if I'm the governor, I'll be in front. I'll lead by example. So he drove the first wagon. After Patrick Henry served his terms as governor, Thomas Jefferson was elected. And Thomas Jefferson chose not to do that. Patrick Henry criticized him for it, And Thomas Jefferson took offense. He was a little bit upset that, hey, this is my office, you had yours, and that's basically what they said to each other, and then agreed to disagree. Of course, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson didn't speak to each other for years and years and years and years. Basically because of the Alien and Sedition Acts. That Thomas Jefferson thought, wow, we've had this Constitution for 6 years and you're already violating it. So it was an issue. One of the best stories, and I will also ask you this, when was the last time you heard a national politician, or a local one for that matter, quote Thomas Jefferson? Because you can't find a quote that is not totally against this Constitution that they have today, that they govern by. Who was the last president to ever mention Thomas Jefferson? Recorded that I can find. If you find different, please let me know. The last president to ever mention Thomas Jefferson was John Kennedy. In 1862, Kennedy had a huge gathering for all of the Nobel laureates in the White House. And he sat down with all of these brilliant people in the room, and John Kennedy said, "We probably have more intelligence gathered in this room today than any time in our history, except when Thomas Jefferson ate here alone."
Wow.
So that was the last time I can find that he was mentioned. Now let's look in the thing that I think that is so, that we have to understand, it's so critical, is when the Constitution was sent to the Congress in September of 1787. James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, even George Washington asked the Congress to please send an endorsement of this Constitution when you send it to the states for ratification. The Congress refused. Congress sent the Constitution to the states for ratification with no comment. Well, I'm sure some of their descendants are probably still there. If your descendants are from Delaware, I'm sorry, I'm about to insult you. But Delaware ran out and voted to ratify the Constitution so they could be first. They never read it, they never discussed it, they never put it before their legislature, they never did anything. They wanted to be the first state. They put it on their license tag today.
Sounds like Colorado.
They wanted to be first. We don't care what it says, we want to be first. So they signed it. The people in Pennsylvania were very upset because they wanted to be first. So they got together and they were trying to beat Delaware to be first. And certain members of their delegation said, no, we're not going to just vote on something until we've read it, until we've taken it apart, until we've examined it. Imagine that. So what did they do? Part of them went off and hid so they couldn't get them all together so they wouldn't have a quorum. So what did the ones who wanted it to be first do?
Sign it anyway.
They sent people out to find them. They sent the cops out to find them, and they beat a couple of them and dragged them back. They still didn't get a quorum. Politics hadn't changed much, people. These were still human beings with all the frailties that humans have. But if you want to know what the Constitution means, and there is a plethora of ways to find it, but it's not taught in school, it's not taught in law school, it's not taught anywhere else, go to the ratification conventions and read. If you want to know what the Constitution means, find out what the people agreed to sign. What did the people, in Virginia, George Mason, the first day, made a motion that we take this thing apart clause by clause by clause by clause and debate it all the way through. A lot of states didn't do this. Virginia started at the preamble. New York, imagine it. I don't know what happened to all the people who used to live in New York. New York was extremely critical. They did the same thing. Let's take this thing apart. Let's read it. Let's find out what's in it. Let's vote on it. In the meantime, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay and Washington are getting all nervous. So if you want to know what the Constitution says, go to the ratification convention. I'll give you several books to read. One of them, if you happen to have one of these Kindles, you can get for free because it's so old. But if you want to know what the Constitution, what any part of the Constitution means, you can find it in those ratification conventions. When Alexander Hamilton was asked in the New York ratification convention, okay, what about this necessary and proper clause? Alexander Hamilton said it's a simple tautocracy. Which means it has no power of its own. It is only here to amplify the first 17. It has no power in and of itself. 3 years later, he claimed something totally different. Imagine, a lying politician. So, if you also, everybody knows, I think I've already said, you know who wrote the Federalist Papers, right?
John J. Madison. And
As soon as they left the Constitutional Convention, they went to New York and started writing these papers. This was a media blitz to get the Constitution passed. Most of the stuff that Alexander Hamilton said in the various essays that he wrote, he went 180 degrees against as soon as he held public office. He set a precedent for a whole lot of politicians. I'm going to tell you I'm going to do this, but you wait until you elect me and I'm going to do what I want to anyway. But probably the one that I would really like to get into here, the one they use against us so often, and we had a district attorney in the 22nd Judicial District a few years ago. I happened to be having lunch with him at Arby's one day, and I asked him, how can the federal government exert their power? How can they do this? And he said, it's in the Supremacy Clause. And I said, well, tell me about the Supremacy Clause. And he jumped up and yelled at me in the middle of Arby's. Hell, I don't know. But it's there. And I said, where? And I said, could it be in Article 6, Section 2? Made him angry. He left me. In both of these constitutions, there is an Article 6, Section 2. It's called the Supremacy Clause, and I will read it for you. Quote, this Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Now, recently in North Carolina, the legislature voted to outlaw Obamacare. The Attorney General, one Roy Cooper, wrote the legislature a letter and said your law is unconstitutional because of the Supremacy Clause. And the great honorable the Attorney General quoted Article 6, Section 2 for them. But he left out 3 words.
In pursuance
thereof.
In pursuance of. Has anybody ever read an 18th century dictionary? You have to be really bored to do that. But has anybody ever really read, get you an 18th century dictionary and look these words up if you want to know what they meant at the time they were written? Because we can't judge words today with a definition. Stop and think how messed up would be. When I was a kid, gay meant happy. Bad was bad,
That's
and crack was